Hello, my name's Geraint Ellis, and I'm a professor in environmental planning at the School of the Natural and Built Environment at Queen's University in Belfast. In this short lecture, I want to give a short taster of some of the topics you might focus on as part of our Bachelor in Science in Planning, Environment and Development. And these topics will also be covered in some of our master's courses as well. All these courses will train you in the skills you needed for a career in town and country planning. And planning is a function that acts behind the scenes, ensuring we live in safe and efficient settlements, allowing us to go about our lives unaware of all the thought and activity that has gone on to organize the places around us. Therefore, while being an urban planner may sometimes feel like a thankless task, it's important because it comes very clear in times of economic, environmental, and social crises that actually something's happening behind the scenes and someone's organizing and got our backs. This is particularly true during the COVID crisis. In this lecture, I'll run through some of the health issues facing cities and explain how planning can protect the well-being of all urban dwellers. So in this short talk, what I wanted to do is cover these different topics. First, I'll talk about the importance of cities in general. I'll give a quick overview of how urban challenges for health have evolved over the centuries. I'll talk a little bit about how place and planning affect our health, and then we'll go on to talk about the actual COVID crisis. So, for the first time ever, the majority of the world's population now lives in cities. This is a trend that will continue for decades to come. So by 2050, we expect 70% of humanity to live in cities. This highlights the great importance in making sure they're safe and prosperous places to live. Indeed, cities are the driving force of the global economy, with 70% of gross domestic product produced in cities, and they're the nerve centers of global financial systems and clearly centers of political power. They drive innovation and knowledge, and for example, almost all universities are located in cities. However, cities also produce some of the world's most waste and climate gases, greenhouse gases. So this means that actually, if we are to conquer some of the key challenges that we're facing in the world, be it poverty, climate change, or struggles for democracy for all of these will be conquered in cities. But cities are also extremely complex. Perhaps after the human brain, the second most complex thing that we know about in the universe. And cities only function effectively when millions of activities they support are coordinated and supported by different infrastructure and so on. And largely this support is provided by town planning. And one of the fundamental duties of town planners, working with engineers and public health professions, is to actually ensure the health of all those living in cities is protected and nurtured. Since the emergence of cities around 3000 BC in the valleys of Mesopotamia and other places, a major concern has been health, particularly focused around securing clean water and food, and the disposal of waste and sewage that accumulates when people live in such densities. Indeed, city living and the economic and cultural benefits that come with it can only exist with adequate health infrastructure. We'll all be aware, for example, of the sophisticated nature of Roman water supplies via aqueducts and their bathhouses, which actually highlights the extent to which hygiene was placed in the very earliest cities. I'm sure you're all aware as well that actually come the Industrial Revolution, UK cities merged for the first time, grew very rapidly, and with them up came new health challenges, particularly facing with overcrowding, poor sanitation, poor air quality, unregulated building, leading to major epidemics of infectious diseases such as typhoid and cholera. For example, this photo shows some of the conditions that existed in Belfast around the turn of maybe the late 19th century. With with the urbanization became a new approach to things, and actually town planning itself was born trying to cope with the issues of early urbanization in the UK. This gave rise to the modern town planning movement. For example, development places like Welwyn Garden City, designed by Ebenezer Howard, one of the fathers of town planning. They tried to put some new ideas into place for the first time, and actually comes to influence many of the things we do today. Many of the cities in the UK, including Belfast, put proposals into place at that time to try and safeguard urban health and build the cities in the face that we have now. Uh, these approaches have been very, very successful, particularly maybe eradicating some of those diseases from the Western world at least. We don't have cholera and typhoid regime. Clearly, those are challenges still facing the global south, but we've largely eradicated, perhaps saving billions of lives over the centuries in Europe through town planning. Despite the successes of tackling many health problems arising from early urbanizations, our societies have evolved so that we now face a new set of challenges. In Western societies prior to COVID-19, we've seen the so-called non-communicable diseases become the main challenges to Western societies. This maybe includes different types of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and a variety of mental health problems. Many of these are due to modern health lifestyles, but strongly influenced by how we interact with our surroundings. This slide, for example, shows the overall disease burden, that is, years lost due to illness, disability, or early death, that arises in the UK. You can see that the most serious challenges are actually lifestyle related, dietary risks, smoking, drinking from alcohol, etc. But actually, there's a huge burden there that also arises from actually the environment around us. You can see I've highlighted those in red that actually have a very strong environmental component. So you can see that actually, you can see that car dependency particularly relates to poor air quality, which you'll know, but actually also fundamentally helps us contributes to low physical activity, and with that, high body mass index and high blood pressure that arises from sort of a lack of activity. Again, you can see there at the bottom, still very small, but there's still unsafe water is still a minor issue in the UK. So the environment around us still influences our health. And this diagram that's on the thing here actually influences this quite well. It shows all the determinants of health. At the very center is almost the central hereditary things that come with our genetics. We're predisposed to certain diseases. Then's the importance of lifestyle. But beyond that are determinants of the environment around us, the type of communities we live in, how wealthy the local area is, or how much deprivation there is, and actually the influence of the built environment. It all points to the importance of the place where we live in shaping our health. Indeed, we often think of cities as being shaped by great feats of human creativity or industry. But in so doing, we actually forget that actually, while we've created cities, they actually shape us in very fundamental ways as well. Despite this, because places are very different, we all live in very different, unequal places, even within the global north, let alone in the south, where inequalities are even greater. This diagram, although small, shows some of the health inequalities in the UK. The top line shows the differences between the most deprived and the least deprived in terms of life expectancy, and the bottom is sort of the overall health. And you can see actually there's differences of maybe between 10 and 20 years life expectancy between some of the most deprived places and the least deprived places in the UK. As town planning actually shapes the places we live, it can therefore also be a very powerful way to address some of these inequalities and the health challenges that arise from that. There are many ways in which planning can help deliver greater health and more equal societies. Some of them are highlighted on this slide. First and foremost is the fact that car dependency detrimentally affects health in many, many different ways, particularly in reducing opportunities for active travel, such as walking and cycling. And that leads to obesity, lack of physical activity, and of course, poor air quality. Uh, Unfortunately, over the last 50, 60 years, our cities have been built around cars. We've almost got addicted to them. This is one of the biggest challenges we face in planning. The more we can actually start to wean off car dependency, more onto active traveling, the heavier, the healthier we can become. We can do this by providing more cycle lanes, more attractive public spaces, and also increasing the density where we live. So we have all the services that we need around us. If we can ensure that everyone has access to green space and local services, shops, schools, health facilities, all perhaps within a 15-minute walk, then it's been shown that actually not only do people use their cars less, but they also have better mental health. They tend to have better diets. And actually, it generates far more cohesive communities, which has another range of other benefits, such as mutual help and feeling of solidarity. We must also ensure that we continue to have clean water and air, making sure the most polluting land uses either don't happen or actually located well away from when they can have the most damage. Finally, we must be aware that while COVID-19 might be today's most urgent challenge, health threats from climate change have not gone away and they'll be with us in the future. This can result in loss of life from extreme weather events such as flooding, and as we've seen in Europe and the UK in the last few weeks, overheating. And through planting more trees, careful smart design, and so on, we can help cities cool while ensuring that actually we don't build on places that are going to be prone to flooding should we have more extreme weather events. There has been a strong movement in planning to put health back at the heart of how we build cities, and many exciting opportunities are arising in this regard for the graduates from our course. The recent COVID-19 crisis has shown that we still face challenges from infectious diseases, and the way we've built our cities has had a big impact on how we've been able to cope with this crisis, highlighting how certain sections of society have been more vulnerable to these moments of stress than others. We're still trying to understand what urban conditions have led to increased levels of infection, and we do know that neighborhood and housing conditions in which people experience during lockdown has been critical in how they've been able to cope during this time. We found that COVID-19 has accentuated pre-existing inequalities. This ranged from the death rate in certain types of jobs and those with pre-existing conditions that may have been shaped by where they live, such as obesity. Those living in overcrowded, poor housing, or those without access to gardens or good local green space have suffered far more under lockdown and in some cases developed new mental health problems. Those living in areas where they do not know their neighbors have felt more isolated and alone during this time. And we know from decades of research and planning in of cities that these issues were already important to be able to address. And progressive planning, if done properly, would have actually put us in a much better position than we are, made us far more resilient for the current crisis. Similarly, many cities like Belfast rushed to introduce pop-up cycle lanes or widen footpaths to allow social distancing, in the knowledge that these now offer alternatives to public transport. And there's an inherent tendency, if we don't provide alternatives, people to go back to the car with all the problems that I've suggested before. For example, it might actually also lead to very long-term changes in the functions of cities and the structure of cities. So we know that actually during this time, a lot of people have been working at home. And actually now some companies are seeing this as an advantage and moving this to a permanent position. We've got to think about how that might affect our cities. So for example, large commercial areas might slowly become vacant and redundant. What are we going to do with them? And what will happen to all the support services that relied on all those commuters, shops, coffee shops, and so on? Maybe what we'll see is actually as people work at home, we'll have actually more demand for those support services in places where they live, suburban shops and so on. The high street was already under stress because of online shopping, and clearly this crisis may actually uh, create even more problems. So we need to think of alternatives for the central part of our cities as well. This is just one of the ramifications that we will have to face in the future arising from the COVID. Many cities will have to adapt and anticipate to these changes. And the more we can do that, the more prosperous our cities will be. Okay, as I have already mentioned, COVID-19 has also highlighted the role a surrounding built environment has on mental health, with access to green space being particularly important. But access to play space and other things are important for different age groups. Older adults have been particularly vulnerable during this time. And it highlights how the needs of children, older people, and so on is never quite affected and really adapted into town planning. We need to think how all different sections of society relate to our cities and to plan for everybody. And finally, if we move to the final words here, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have lived through an experience that we all hope that we'd never have to endure again. Some people have suffered this more than others, often because of the place in which they live. As we emerge from the crisis phase of the pandemic, we will need to learn the lessons about all sorts of things, but particularly about how we organize our cities and how we can best protect and improve urban health. This should always be the highest priority for cities. And if they're to be fair and sustainable places to live, this is something we need to think about very, very seriously. If cities are to flourish in the future, they need to know how to adjust to new circumstances like the ones we now find ourselves. And it's town planning that provides the element of how we do this. Hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thank you.